Welcome, Lady Family Live. Here we are again. Welcome back to all of those that have joined us in the past, and to the newcomers. Welcome to the program. This is where we like to hang out, talk about wine, taste wine, talk about all kinds of things. And I think we've done some fun sessions over the last year. That's right. It's almost been a year since our first one. I think our first Lady Family Live was in April of last year when the first shutdown took place. So. Yeah, almost a year in. This has been great though. It's been nice connecting with everyone, and I've been getting some great feedback. So thank you guys for that. For those of you who maybe are new, I'm Jason Lede. I'm Cliff's son, and I am, I guess, second generation vintner here. I run the hospitality program at this point in time. I've got a great team. So if you've been to the winery over the last little while, maybe we've met, maybe not. But you've probably met members of our team if you've came and tasted here before. We've got a great crew. On that note, we are open. We are open for outdoor tastings currently, and luckily with this beautiful weather we've been having, it's just absolutely perfect to hang out outside and taste wine at this point in time. We believe that soon we'll be getting some indoor tastings, so we're looking forward to that. Should maybe happen next week. We'll get the final word probably next Tuesday. We will be opening our VIP section soon as well. So those of you who maybe visited last summer, last fall, we had a special new section set up where you could taste the best wines, including stuff like Songbook. And so we'll be opening that up, hopefully backstage where I'm at tonight. Hopefully that opens up soon too, when we get the go ahead for indoors. We're doing some other fun stuff. We're doing the evening interlude, which is kind of a late afternoon, early evening wine tasting and pairing that we're doing. So if you want to swing by, if you're in Napa and you're looking for something fun to do at that 5 o'clock hour, check us out online. We've got reservations available on Talk. It's a really fun thing. We'll have live music and some great food from local caterer, and of course beautiful wines from Cliff Lede Vineyards. All right, but that covers all the basic stuff. Tonight is all about Songbook, which is a part of our Platinum Series wines. One of the greatest wines I think we produce every single year, year in, year out. And we've never done a real heavy focus on it in a webinar. We've done poetry in the past, and of course we've done many of the new release tastings as well. But Songbook, this is going to be great. On that note, we still have both 2007 and 2017 available. There's a tiny little bit of each left. So if you are interested in picking any of those up after tonight's session, please let us know. But I am going to, I believe, promote my dad as a panelist here to get him on. I'm fairly certain this should be him, although it is under a different name. So we'll have to just wait and see. And it is him. There he is. All right.
But Kim Whistler is much better looking than me, but it is what it is. We have technical difficulties here.
So, you know what? I can go ahead and I can actually rename you. So now there you go. So now it's official. So now you're Cliff.
Okay.
So
right.
Welcome,
hello,
Dad.
everybody.
It's nice to see you. Welcome to Lady Family Live, obviously kicking off the Songbook webinar tonight. So thank you for joining. Anybody that's watching tonight, if you have questions, anything you want, throw it in the chat. We want to hear what you're drinking. If you've got questions for my dad, throw them out there and I'll try to intersperse them as we go through here. But this is all about Songbook, so let's kick it off. We've talked about poetry in the past. It's the Vineyard. We have the Poetry Inn. You can really point to that place when people visit. Tokalon, another one of our platinum wines, it's the vineyard people know, like the Beckstoff or Tokalon vineyard. But Songbook maybe is one that doesn't necessarily have like such a concrete, story to it. So how do you describe Songbook? What exactly is Songbook, and how do you, how did it all come together?
Well, I guess, it started almost at the beginning when we started thinking about this. We have the Poetry Vineyard and we have the Estate Vineyards, but when after I moved to Napa, I got to know some people that were great growers and had some amazing vineyards, and I always thought, well, it'd be interesting to make some wines from those vineyards. And so we needed a name, And I remember talking to our marketing guy at that time, and we sort of thought songbook because, you know, would keep with the music, you know, the music theme that we have going. And, you know, we always thought songbook was kind of like if you were a professional musician or studio musician, and, you know, you had your book of songs, you had things either you were writing or things you were going to perform with a band, and they were all great things. And so we thought songbook would be a great way if you were making a wine from 2 or 3 distinct, you know, amazing Napa vineyards, that was a great name. So the first year we did it was 2005, I think, if my memory, you know, my recollection is right.
2005,
and,
yep.
Yeah. And, you know, it's just a great addition, you know, to the family of wines. It's because it's different than poetry, and it's different than the estate wines.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you know, having that kind of music and poetry and all that tie in, I can see why you went that direction. And you know, obviously that's something we want to touch on tonight is you know, what really makes this wine different. Now, you know, we're going to taste a couple of different wines tonight. So maybe you can help tell us a little bit, you know, the story of that. You touched on a little bit, but like earlier on when it kind of came together. I mean, if we go back to the 2007 vintage, go back to those early years of the winery being, you know, very much in its youth. I mean, you built the actual winery building in 2005. So this is only a couple years later. I mean, you know, what was that like? You were working with a totally different team. You know, you mentioned the different growers you're working with. What was it like working with people like Michel Rolland? And for those of you who are, you know, not familiar with Michel Rolland, I mean, this is the guy who consults for Harlan, Bryant, Delaval, Angelus out in Bordeaux, Pavie, Leoville Poifer, Pontet Canet. I mean, you got to hang out with that guy back then. So I mean, what was that like?
Well, it was a unique experience. I mean, you know, I'm a construction guy, and I'm sitting at a table with, you know, Michel Rolland and David Abreu, and at that time our winemaker Michelle Edwards, and sort of, you know, a couple icons of the wine business and blending wine. And it was really educational. You know, obviously it was something I didn't know, you know, basically nothing about. And, you know, you start with 90 different blocks, and at the end of the day, you make 4 or 5 that they put together to make a wine. And it was really educational. And, you know, he's a really nice guy. And we were 5 years old at the time. You know, we're turning 20, you know, basically this time next year. And at that time, we called it the dream team, and we thought that's what we needed. And I think we did at that time, you know, but as you know, the wineries evolved in, you know, 2012 or 11, I guess it was 12 when Chris came on. And my goal was to always have everything in-house, you know, and, you know, eventually we moved the viticulture in-house, we moved the winemaking in-house. And although I had the dream team for, I don't know what it was, like 6, 7, 8 years or so, maybe a bit more, you know, the first 100-point score we got from Parker was with the in-house people. And it kind of taught me a little bit that, you know, you don't need the dream team. It was a good thing to get us going, but bringing Chris in and having somebody that's there day in, day out, tasting the wines and knowing what they can do and how to put them together, you know, I think we've done just as well. Well, I think we've done better, but you know, that's not saying anything negative or anything. You know, those were great guys, and I learned a ton, and it was good for us, you know, to start. It was a good place to start.
And so then on the back of the bottle, you know, it says this wine is the result of a handshake. And so, you know, I know there's a lot of these handshake deals, but I got to feel like that was kind of maybe, you know, that era back then in Napa when you were going around and meeting people. Is that true? Is that kind of where that story comes from, or where that line comes from?
Yeah, it was, you know, we didn't have contracts back then. We just worked with the grower, and he said he was going to give us, you know, this many tons. And, you know, we didn't even have one-pagers at that time. It was just literally a handshake. And it was kind of old school farming. I kind of enjoyed it. You know, like it's a little different now. You know, we have one-pagers now at least. So
yeah. Well, and you mentioned, you know, sitting at the blending table with these guys, and I mean, tasting through all these wines, and you know, I've only had really brief experience with that, but I think it's, you know, it's something you got to point out that it's not not an easy thing to do. You think tasting wine all day is an easy thing to do, but you know, you taste maybe 90 lots of wine, as you mentioned, and it's almost like your mouth is just painful after that. I don't know how these guys like Michel Rolland, I don't know how they go to like winery to winery to winery and keep going on and on and on throughout the day, and you know, keep that palate, because it's a little taxing. It's a little taxing.
Yeah, it's a good point, because you know it's more than 90 glasses. I mean, everybody on this call probably knows how many different wines we make, and you know, it's a lot of tasting. And by, you know, if we started usually around 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and we'd finish about 1 o'clock, 1:30, have a quick bite, and then he'd head off, you know, to his next tasting. And you know, I know you do this and you spit, but I always thought to myself after he's done 2 of these, I wonder if he should have a driver. And I remember Robert Parker used to have a driver when he came to the Valley. So
yeah,
no matter, you know, you could spit all you want, but when you're doing that much tasting, but it's a tough job, like you say. I couldn't do it. To do that day after day after day, and 2 times a day, it'd be, you know, people think, oh, I get to taste wine all day.
Yep.
And these, as you know, these aren't 40-year-old wines. They're high, they're tannic, they're like
low tannic. They're big wines. So, you know, we're getting a couple questions about, you know, what changed over the years and whatnot, but I got to think, like, so you kind of learned from Michel Rolland, from these guys, and you know, when Chris came on board in 2012, Chris Tynan, did you sit down with him and blend with him, and you know, did you kind of like how did you go from working with consultants all the time to then kind of like handing the reins over to just one guy, to take, you know, what got you to make that decision?
You know, I think it was just more that, you know, from my background, you know, in construction, we did everything in-house, and my goal was to always do it in-house. And you know, for most people on this call, they'll remember Remy when she came on board. She took over the vineyards, and eventually I realized that she was plenty capable of running the vineyards just as good as David Abreu. So we had that under control. And then Chris came on, and I felt the same with the winemaking. I thought, you know, let them do their thing. They're young, they're well-educated, and they're driven, and they're passionate about what they do. And their focus is 365 days a year, you know, whatever, 10 hours a day on the wines at Cliff Lede. They're not popping in for 4 or 5 hours and helping blend these wines and then going off to their other, you know, 200 customers. And I just think when somebody's there day in, day out, working with the wines, they know what's gonna bring what to the table, so to speak.
Yeah, it's that extra level of attention to detail in the vineyards, and you know, like for our team now, right? It's Allison in the vineyard and watching that, you know, growing season throughout the whole year, and then, you know, Chris working very closely with her, tasting the fruit during as we lead up to harvest, and then, you know, getting that wine to tank, then to barrel, then to bottle. I mean, I guess you lose a little bit of that when you're just working with consultants. So I think that was a great answer, Dad, and I think that, you know, comprehensively got that question. Let's see if there's any other couple ones in here for you. You know, there's a couple questions about the vineyards and stuff. And I think we'll let Chris kind of touch on those, because he is kind of the expert on what we work with out there. But you know, I think that pretty much covers, you know, the vision and the background of what this wine is. I kind of want to get to tasting it, and I'm going to do that with Chris. So maybe at this point in time, we'll let you go, and I'll get Chris on here so we can start tasting and start kind of comparing things. And if there's anything else you'd like to say, now is your time. Otherwise, I'm gonna cut you off.
No, I'm good. You cut me off, and you and Chris do your thing. I'll be listening, and if you need me, just holler.
All right, great. Well, with that, then I am going to try to bring Chris Tynan on here. Dad, just hang on one sec while I get Chris on, and then I will get you back to where you can just kind of watch. Hey, Chris, how's it going?
Hey, everybody.
So we got a bit of an echo there in the winery.
Is it hard to make? Is it better if I speak up a little closer? How is that?
I think you sound okay. If we get anything from the chat, then we'll maybe change that. But why don't we go here? I just got to make sure I can get my dad out of there. All right. Oh no, hang on. We'll go like this for now.
Am I still on or
Yeah, you're
you-
still on. I'm just trying to figure out how to get you back because now that you're no longer the Kim Whistler that you were before, it kind of changed how this all. There we go. All right. Bye, Dad. All right. So Chris, welcome. Great to see you. Let's taste some wine. I'm ready to do that if you are. I think we both have the beautiful 2007 and 2017 songbook. I'm going to get mine poured in the glass. But let's see, where are we kicking this off? Why don't you know what I would like to do? Why don't you taste the wine? You didn't make the 2007, but I would like you to taste it. Why don't you kind of give us like, what are your thoughts at this point in time as a professional, as a wine professional? What are you thinking? Where's this wine at? You know, flavor profile. Just give us your rundown on this 07.
This the 2007 vintage is really considered one of the best vintages of that decade. It was kind of a dry winter with a really warm spring, a very long growing season that got it got warm throughout the year, but not super hot. So what that did was allowed the grapes to get ripe. You get these beautiful ripe flavors, but there's also you've got that fresh acidity underneath. The young wines, when they were very young, were massive, Arnold Schwarzenegger type wines, like beasts, and they required patience and time in the cellar. And when I open this wine and I'm tasting it now, I'm like, oh, see, this is why we age wines. I mean, it's so silky smooth. It's really polished and really pretty, perfumed, tons of spice. I mean, Jason, are you getting the smoked cardamom and cinnamon and just these exotic spices are just coming out. This wine is begging for some lamb or wild game, veal, just something to pair with it. Even like anything with mushrooms. It's just so beautiful and aromatic and just in a really beautiful spot right now.
I definitely get the cinnamon. And I definitely get like this really like beautiful dried red cherry quality. Now, I think you said smoked cardamom. My palate is not that expensive. That's actually maybe a good question. How do you train your palate? I mean, do you just go to the grocery store and pick all these things off the shelf and take them home and kind of smell them and lock them into your brain?
Yeah, sometimes I'll be, especially if I'm ever in an Indian grocery store or an Asian grocery store where I see something that I've never smelled before, I will definitely buy that off the shelf or if I'm allowed to take a little whiff of something to get it into the sense memory, because that really helps me. This particular wine is special to me because in my previous job before Lede, I was the assistant winemaker at Colgan, and we worked with the same vineyards that went into this. So I really started working with these vineyards back in 2006, and so flash forward to the 17, which we'll taste next. I've really had a chance to get to know the expression of the vineyards that go into Songbook every year. Poetry and Tokalon, the other two in our Platinum playlist, those are kind of like single expressions from one vineyard. If we use a musical reference, we might say poetry is Jimi Hendrix. It's one expression from one singular artist that's amazing. Where Songbook is a little bit more like a Led Zeppelin. We've got an amazing singer, we've got an amazing guitar player, one of the best bassists, and one of the best drummers of all time. And so we get to pick and choose these amazing little sections of Napa Valley and create something, that's really unique and very singular, but it speaks to the entire Napa Valley as well. So we are so when I'm using these notes to describe the wine, it's something that I've learned, 15 years ago in just knowing these wines and going back and tasting them. They just have this unique expression of terroir that transcends vintages and expresses itself subtly differently every year. So that's one of the fascinating things about watching these amazing vineyards and making wine from them, is that how true to type they are from year to year.
And so the two main vineyards that are involved in both the bottles we're tasting tonight are the Torvilos Vineyard and Madrona Ranch. So I've seen a couple questions about the vineyards in the chat there. So can you expand on those two particular sites and maybe what makes them a little different or similar, and then when you piece them together, how they complement each other to make such an incredible wine? And maybe even then expand on the varietals that we work with from those sites, because I think there's a few of them.
Yeah. First of all, Madrona Ranch is on the western side of St. Helena, right at the base of the mountain there. You've got Spring Mountain right on top of it. So it's literally the hillsides that are leading into the upper elevations. So that particular vineyard is Aiken loam soil, one of the most desirable soil types to have in Napa Valley. It's why David sought that vineyard out to plant. Rocky, gravelly, to me, the most analogous to the Grave region in Bordeaux. Just really well drained. Does amazing with Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon, two varieties that really love rocky, gravelly soil. Then you go across the valley to the Torvilos Vineyard, which is at the base of Howell Mountain. And that's a different soil type. It's more volcanic. It's tufa, white volcanic soil. And that's got more watering holding capacity. So Merlot, we got Merlot and Cabernet Franc, Merlot, a little bit of Cabernet and some Petit Verdot there. So the Merlot and the Petit Verdot, I can really taste those expressions in the 07. Those were those crazy aromatics are coming from, those spices and deep color, those base notes. And then the beautiful cassis and blackberry from the Cabernet Sauvignon over in Madrona Ranch across the valley. And then the Franc in this wine is really beautiful. I mean, it's really lifting everything up and super aromatic and little tobacco leaf and tobacco juice. And this wine is really singing, I think, right now. It's really beautiful.
Nice. I agree. It's always fun for me to go back and taste 2007s. That was the first year I worked harvest ever. I worked full harvest at Cliff Lede Vineyards. So I worked with, as my dad mentioned earlier on, Michelle Edwards, our winemaker at that time. But one of my favorite things to do as an intern was going to the vineyards and sampling the fruit and then bringing that back to the lab. But being out in these sites, and like the Poetry Vineyard and the Stagsley District is like, it's so much my home that I see it all the time and I'm so used to it. And it's just so much visually different when you go to places like Torvilos or Madrona Ranch. They're so different and beautiful vineyards. And I love that I can still go visit those, because I think you and I think it was 2017 when I hopped in the truck with you and Allison and we drove vineyards for the day, and we went up to Torvilos first thing in the morning. And then we ended up down at Madrona Ranch later on, and then tasted some fruit here on the home site shortly thereafter. So it's great actually to taste both these wines, because I remember visiting those sites in those vintages and tasting the fruit and now going back tasting the wines is always fun. So my last question about the 07, your thoughts on drinking window. Is this peaking right now? Is this another 10, 15 years? Would you hold it? What do you think?
I think it's ready for prime time. I think, but there is no rush to drink this wine. I think, the structure is there. The aromas are there. You're just starting to get those subtle age notes on the very edge, but wine is so much fruit and in the aromas. There's no dried fruit. It's all really lush and fresh and beautiful plum and black cherry. I think this has another easy 10, 15 years in it. So there's no rush. I think give it it still needs probably another hour, 2 hours in the decanter before you want to serve it. But really gorgeous wine with it's just really elegant and pretty right now.
I found too with the 07s, they took a little while to kind of like just get over that kind of awkward, puberty teenage year, like over the last 3 to 5 years, like the 07s were just a little like kind of tight. And I feel like they're just starting to enter. So I'm glad to hear that you think, we're kind of entering prime time, because that's kind of my feedback as far as my palate goes. I like where this wine is, and I like where it's going to go in the next 5+ years. I think it's going to be really incredible. But enough about the 07, unless we have questions. Everybody, if you have questions, we'll try to get to the questions at the end too, and we do a Q&A. But in the interest of time, let's start talking about 2017. Now, this was a vintage, of course, that we'll never forget. I actually remember when we went up to the vineyards that day. It was, I believe it was Labor Day, or right around Labor Day, right when that heat wave was starting. We were up at the Thorvilos vineyard, and it was, 8 a.m., maybe earlier, 8 a.m. or right around there. And it was already like 83 degrees. And we were thinking like, ooh, it's going to be a cooker today. So how did that impact the vintage? Obviously, being able to harvest earlier and bring the fruit in earlier and avoid any of the fire impacts was huge. But just, when you have an earlier harvest, a little bit warmer year, how does that affect the wine? And how does that affect your decision to pick and when to pick?
A great question. I think that in the level of winemaking where we are, especially with these vineyards that we're talking about, one of the things we can't control is Mother Nature, but how we react to it and prepare for it really sets a good vineyard from a great vineyard. So, obviously we have weather forecasts. We know the heat is coming. Up come the shade cloth to protect the fruit from the hottest part of the day of the sun. We're putting irrigation on. We're feeding the plants enough water to last them through that heat wave, so we don't get any shriveling or raisoning. We're doing a lot of, even before that, we're doing a lot of canopy management to grow the vines in a way where the leaves will protect the fruit from the hottest part of the day and shade the fruit with dappled sunlight. And we're also dropping clusters before, so the plant isn't trying to ripen a massive amount of fruit. It's got a very manageable amount of fruit. Then after sort of these events where the heat waves come through, we're sending folks in to clip off any clusters that maybe stuck out a little too far, that didn't manage the heat as well. Those never make it into the winery. They never make it into the picking bins. And then following that heat wave, we made a decision that because it was a warmer year already, we were really pretty far advanced. So we wanted to protect that beautiful acidity that was already there. So we said, let's bring the fruit in. Luckily, your dad bought us a beautiful optical sorter. So any of that fruit that we didn't get in the vineyard is still never going to make it into our tanks. We're going to get the optical sorter. We're going to sort out any berries that aren't up to our standards. And so we like to think even in tougher years like 17, we're still going to make amazing wine because we've got amazing vineyards, we've got amazing equipment, we've got this wonderful winery. Remember these tanks, Jason, that you probably cleaned a lot of those in 2007?
I remember seeing those get put in 05. I remember, the concrete pads that are underneath.
Yeah.
I remember before the tanks were in there, we had a big lunch in there with everybody. We sat on those concrete pads and just ate lunch. But
right.
Anyway, yes, I do remember cleaning those tanks. Cleaning tanks.
But we do this. We have this technology. We have this infrastructure here because that's going to make us make great wine every year. It's going to lift us up to another level, and it's caring enough to want to make great wine every year. And we know we only get one chance every year to make great wine, and so we want to do everything possible we possibly can to put ourselves in the place to make good wine. So even with that heat wave, we were still able to make amazing wine. We had to be a little bit more draconian in our selection of what actually made the final blend. But I think when you taste the 17, the wine speaks for itself. It's really pretty. You still get all those wonderful aromatics, those spiced aromatics that come from those two vineyards. Just lots of pretty lush fruit and this super bright acidity that's going to carry the wine for a long, long, long time.
Nice. Yeah, it's Well, I opened this bottle maybe 2 hours ago in the tasting room, and I had the team taste it, and everybody was just like, "Whoa!" Just blown away. I mean, a lot of red cherry fruit, I think, was like the main thing that people were saying, like as opposed to maybe poetry, which has a darker fruit profile and more cassis. I don't know if that's what you would pick up on, but that was definitely like one of the greatest pieces of feedback from everybody was just how like pure that like red fruit, that cherry is on this wine. And clearly, I mean, if you tasted the Tokalon and poetry and this side by side, they are three very different wines, uh, obviously for different reasons.
Yeah, I think as far as decanting, I think you're going to need more time, obviously, with the 17 being a younger wine. I would almost encourage people to open it the night before, just take out a little sample, make sure it's good, put the cork back in, keep it in the cellar, and then drink it the next night. It's going to need that much time. It's just very powerful, and it's going to drink beautifully if you do that. You can still drink it young and enjoy it, but it's going to need a little bit more decanting time than the 07 for sure, which is obvious, but important to say.
Yep. So now that you're kind of at the helm of the winemaking, over the last, what is it, 9 years now coming, what when you approach Songbook, I mean, like, what are you going for? Because like you mentioned it a little bit with Tokalon, it's like it's the Tokalon vineyard. So from all the fruit we get, you're likely just selecting the best of the best, and then that becomes the Tokalon. Poetry, you have a little bit more blending, but you're still really trying to express poetry. With Songbook, I mean, it's a little bit more, but the boundaries are less confined, I guess. So from a blending standpoint, what direction do you take? Do you have a specific, like, it's got to be at least 80% cab or 90, or has it fluctuated in your experience? How do you, I guess, how do you approach that when you make this wine?
Yeah, I think because Cabernet in Napa Valley, even if we bottled 100% Cabernet, which we do, like a Tokalon and some other stuff that we do here, Cabernet, Napa Valley can grow Cabernet Sauvignon that can stand on its own and be complex and just as Joe Heitz used to say, they can only get Cabernet ripe like 6 years out of 10 in Bordeaux. So they need Merlot, Franc, and Petit Verdot. So I think to your question, we always are going to have great Cabernet. What those other varieties are doing are maybe filling in and expanding on and complexing that Cabernet. I mean, we're doing a lot with this wine to make the Cabernet even better. And if we can get Cabernet, we know is a big wine with lots of tannin. So Merlot, if we want a little bit more elegance and richness and fatness in the palate, Merlot is going to give it that mid-palate expanse with lots of pretty, we'd like to say that's kind of like a cashmere texture. So that will balance out some of those tannins in the Cabernet. And again, the Franc is going to have another beautiful structure with really high aromatics in the glass. So that's going to push all those Cabernet flavors up into the upper register of your retronasal cavity. When you taste that wine and you get that tobacco in the back of your palate, that's that Cabernet Franc doing its magic. And then for power and tannin, which we don't really need with Cabernet, but Petit Verdot is going to add that. So that's why usually your Petit Verdots are, usually 6% or less in most of the wines from Napa Valley. And that's a reason. It's because it's giving some wild aromatics, incense and plum and a lot of those spice characters I talked about earlier. It just has naturally in those grape skins those wild aromatics. So it's all in service of elevating that Cabernet to an even higher level and making it better. So in a normal left bank wine from Bordeaux, you might have as little as 50. Sometimes 45% Cabernet Sauvignon, and the rest is Merlot and Franc and a little bit of Petit Verdot. Whereas here, majority of the time, we're going to be around to that 75 to 95% cab in these blends.
What about oak usage? Year after year, have you changed your perspective on that? And does it change when you have riper, warmer years, riper years? versus, you know, maybe cooler or extended growing seasons. How does the oak program come into play? Do you make that decision in the vineyard? Maybe just expand on that.
Yeah, we really start thinking about it early on, you know, as the weather's playing out in the spring and the summer. Um, and then once the grapes go through veraison, when we start tasting, we're already thinking about, okay, is this going to be a year that the wines are going to need a little bit, are going to be able to handle a little bit more new oak, you know, to give them more structure and freshness, or is that going to get in the way? And oftentimes, you know, if the weather changes, the weather can change anything on a dime, but that continues into the winery when we get the fruit during fermentation, especially in the early fermentations. We're tasting that, watching the tannins evolve, watching the vintage character kind of come out in the wines. And we're blessed to have a nice big cave behind me where we can store a lot of new barrels and a lot of used barrels. So as a winemaker, you want to have as many choices as possible. So I can do 100% used oak on a lot, or I can do 100% new, depending on what I think the wine needs. And oftentimes I'll try to guesstimate what a certain percentage of a wine will need. And then when we come to blending, because we make songbook and poetry and To Kalon in such small volumes, I can go through during blending and just maybe sample just the used barrels or just the new barrels or one particular cooper. And those can go into the blend and others don't. So we like to have options, and choosing new oak or used oak is a wonderful luxury to have as a winemaker. So, and that's because we're sculpting these wines during blending, and we want to have as many, you know, colors in the palette as a painter would have when we're crafting these. So that's a good question. Obviously, you don't want the wine to taste like oak, but we want that oak to integrate over time and be seamless, and let the wine kind of carry it through its youth into its teenage and adult years.
So as you're talking about oak, it like turned the light bulb on for me. And I remembered one of the things that I used to love doing with you is we'd take groups through the cave, which unfortunately we haven't been doing this past year, but hopefully soon. We'd always pass by those barrels with like the super intricate design on them, and they had a date on them from like 400 years ago. And you would tell this story, and I swear, like that was the moment when you knew they were going to sign up for Platinum Playlist or whatever, because that story is incredible. So, you know, even just beyond the standard, you know, French oak barrels that we use, we have these very special barrels that I believe with, you know, all of our platinum wines benefit from this use, from using those barrels. So can you tell us that story today? I would like to hear that again.
Absolutely. Well, among the many things that go into the winemaking process is the selection of oak, and we use all French oak here at Lede. And one of our coopers I work very close with, I've known him for a long time. His name is Jean-Luc Sylvain, and he's one of the last true independent coopers in Bordeaux. His father was a barrel maker, and he's as passionate about oak as we are about wine. And so he has sourced and identified some of the heritage trees in France. And basically what happens back in the 1600s, in the Louis XIV era, Louis XIV had this gentleman named Colbert map the forests of France because they wanted to secure the wood for, you imagine at that time they needed tall masts for ships. The beams that burned up in Notre Dame, was it last year, 2 years ago? Those giant beams that stretch 100 and 200 yards. You know, they needed big, giant beams for buildings. So what happens, basically, it's like growing corn, except it doesn't happen in 1 year. It happens in 350 years. If you take a bare piece of forest, now it's the French government. The French government will come in and they will harvest any trees that aren't growing straight or crooked or the wrong species. And they will encourage the growth of oak trees in forests where oak trees go. They'll begin to start cutting trees down after 50 years. They'll do it again in 100 and 150 years. And at that time, at 150 years, they will only leave the strongest, best, largest oak trees to live because they want that genetic material from those acorns to populate the new forest. So some of the barrels that we use in our highest end wines, like Poetry and Songbook and Topolon, are from these heritage trees. And I've been in the forests, in the Transe forest with Jean-Luc when we've cut some of these trees down, and it's fascinating. It's the trees have lived their life. Maybe they're starting to die a little bit, and they want to be able to use the wood while the tree is still alive, and they can use it for something good instead of just having the tree fall over. In a normal tree, you can just get a few barrels out of each tree. And I believe in the larger trees, they can get 40 barrels of wood out of these larger trees. And we generally try to buy as much as we can that they import to the US. But when you've got this tree cut down in the French forest and you can start pointing to, oh, this is when America was started, all these little things that happen. You can see the burn marks during the 1940s where the Allied bombers would drop their extra payload going back to Europe. There were a lot of forest fires during World War II. He can sit there and point to the exact year. So it's another cool thing that goes into our wines that we don't sort of brag about, but pretty amazing thing to have wine aged in 350-year-old oak stave barrels. It's kind of a cool thing.
It's very cool, and seeing those barrels is always neat. And anytime I've tried to tell that story, it's totally, just garbled. So thank you for telling that story. I think it's very cool and very interesting. And I mean, such a small lot of these barrels even go out to wineries, and to have them is really special. Just like Songbook. I mean, this is one of the smallest production wines we make. In fact, I don't even know, it might even be the smallest production wine we make. Certainly in the top tier. So it's been delicious. It's been delicious to enjoy. It's been delicious to enjoy it, Chris. Kudos to you and your team for crafting such an incredible wine. Drinking window on this, I mean, what do you think? 40 years?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. If you can, pop a bottle, try it out just to get a sense of what it's like, and then, try to, keep your hands off it for another year or two and check back in with it. But it's going to be it's a really amazing wine in a tough vintage, and it's going to be one that people will say, oh, 17, that's not a great vintage, and you open that wine for them and they'll be like, ah, crap.
It'll be like how 2011 was, when everyone was like, I don't know about 2011, and then now everybody loves 2011.
Exactly.
But that is what it is. The writers sometimes have to pick on something because, like you've said in the past, it's like Napa Valley. It's like every year is a great year. We were so blessed with just consistent weather and warm weather, and it's really hard to pick out, pick on a year. And when they get the opportunity to, they tend to do that. So last question, or I guess my last question for you, and maybe this is where we'll kind of kick off the Q&A. So everybody watching, if you have questions, please put them in the chat now so we can address them. But the question that I want to ask you, Chris, how's this year going so far? Do we have an indication of where things are at? What are you thinking about 2021 so far? I know it's super early. It's beautiful out there, though. I see things are just starting. What do you think?
Well, right now, I think the biggest weather factor is that we've had about 50% of our average rainfall. And so we're getting out there, we're mowing the cover crop, and because we don't want that to compete with our vines, because we know the soil is going to be a little drier starting off. That might mean we might want to irrigate a little earlier in the spring. We'll see how it goes. We're not out of spring yet. We still might get a little more rain. But generally, when you have less rain over winter, and especially in the early spring, late winter, that means the soil's going to warm up a little sooner. That means we've already got bud break in our Merlot and a little bit of Petit Verdot. The cab's still pretty dormant right on our Twin Peaks property and our Poetry property, but it's coming soon.
Yep.
The earlier the buds break, the more chance you have for frost damage. So there's never an easy time for farmers. So we're always worried about everything. So once we get past the frost zone, then we're going to start looking towards crop level. Generally, when you've got a dry winter, your crop level is going to be a little bit lower because the vines are pretty smart. They know, like, hey, the soils are drier. I can't put out 10 tons an acre. I need to just put out 2.5, 3 tons an acre. So that's kind of what we're looking at early on this harvest. But for people that like us that have been cooped up for a year, a little warm sunny spring weather is great for the tasting room and the patio, for everyone to come visit. And it's great for us to go hiking and enjoy some fresh air, to get out of our homes, which we're all tired of being in.
Absolutely. I mean, this time of year, being a guy who grew up in Canada, especially in like northern Alberta, winter was never really the favorite season. Maybe like the start of winter, when it was like Christmas was coming and you get the snow, and you could go to the mountains and start playing hockey outside and stuff. And I miss that. I love that about winter. But especially at this point in time, if it's still cold, it's not your favorite season. But now that I live in Napa Valley, it's my favorite season. I just absolutely love this time of year. The air is so fresh. I mean, and you get these days where it's like 65, 70 degrees, and it's just, I mean, it's like, where else would you want to live? Especially everything's green, and it's so beautiful. It's been nice to be here. But along with that, being sort of quarantined and not being able to travel, there is a question about, how's the past year with the pandemic and COVID and everything, has that changed anything in how we're making the wine necessarily? I mean, obviously, the safety protocols and stuff, but from a winemaking perspective, I can't imagine that there's that much of a drastic difference, other than maybe, you got to taste outside more, or what do you think?
Yeah, it's more about just being proactive and staying healthy. Take everyone's temperature. Last year, bottling was our first time we had to bottle with, people are coming in and out of the winery, so we've got masks on, and just staying safe and making sure no one got sick, or anyone that got sick didn't come to the winery. We made it through without any scares or anyone getting sick. So knock on wood, we did the right thing, and we stayed safe. Looking forward to this year. All of our vineyard crew has been vaccinated already. The production staff has been vaccinated. So right now we just need those people that are watching to come visit us and come taste wine with us. So it looks like we've got a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. But as far as the only thing maybe it affects is packaging, like getting bottles from Europe, and sometimes containers taking a little bit longer. So being proactive with ordering stuff, because it's taking a long time.
From the on the sales and the business side, obviously COVID's had a huge impact, but we don't need to get into all that, because like you say, the light's at the end of the tunnel, and it's great. They've just announced the dates for Californians to get their vaccines, and so things are moving up, and then the future's bright. So that's some great news. What else do we got here? We had a question about comparing poetry and songbook, and I think I briefly touched on it. To me, poetry seems to be a little bit more muscular and a little bit darker fruited. Songbook, striking me with a little bit more red fruit, and maybe it was that like spice note that you mentioned. What do you think if you compare those two wines? Like, what's the biggest difference that you would point to?
Yeah, I think the soil type in poetry is completely different from those other two vineyards that we use for songbooks. So it's a very different type of volcanic soil that we have over in poetry. It's much newer. It's rockier. It's thicker. It's harder. It's still based with that rhyolitic base, but much shallower soils. And so the vines are producing much smaller berries, smaller clusters, with more concentration. I think Torbulos and Madrona Ranch have a little bit more generosity to those wines, because the berries are a little bigger and the soils are a little deeper. So the concentration in poetry is going to be a little bit higher. I think it's going to be more concentrated wine, and the resulting wine is going to need a little bit more time to just kind of settle into itself. and the aromatics tend to be more rocky based, almost granite-like in their aromas, like lots of stone and whereas you might get a little more floral elements in Songbook early on.
Awesome. Another question here. Do we have different microclimates throughout Cliff Lede vineyards? I believe, we're looking valley floor and slopes at Cliff Lede. Are they similar to regard as one? My instinct is no. I mean, just walking around this vineyard and walking up from, Poetry down to the end of the west side of our property. I mean, it can be like a 10-degree shift in temperature. Is that what you see?
Different. Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Our western side of our property that's a little bit lower and heading towards the river is just around the knoll, one of the Twin Peaks. And that gets it gets that cold blast of air from Carneros. It's up in that central kind of, we call it like the central flyway of Napa, where you get this air conditioner blast every evening. And like you said, it could be 10 degrees cooler there as opposed if you're at the top of Poetry in the afternoon, where you might be catching that little bit of afternoon sun that's a little bit warmer. And so, there's so many, and then so many other little ones that I could go into on Twin Peaks alone. That's pretty fascinating. And you can see it when you're here and you can see the fog, the way the fog settles in different places. And terroir is a real thing.
Yeah.
It's amazing what 100 yards can do to a wine.
We're blessed that, I mean, we have this, like, that is one thing I always try to relay to people when I walk them to the vineyard, is just how much diversity there is just in our little section of Stags Leap District. We have north facing slopes, and we have, valley floor, we have west facing slopes and different soil types. I mean, there's so much to work with, and I mean, that's a testament to who we are. We can grow all 5 of the Bordeaux, the common red varietals, and because of those microclimates and those different conditions. So, couple quick ones. Decanting time on these wines, I think we said, a couple hours for each of them would do them well. The 17 probably could, you could probably open that up in the morning if you wanted to.
Yeah, I would recommend doing that in the morning. Yeah. And then
there you go. So at least a couple hours on the 17.
Yeah.
And then maybe a couple hours on the 07. What else? Oh, I wanted to mention that there are other vintages available. We really talked about, 2 wines, but we have large formats and things like that of other vintages. Chris, just off the top of your head, do you have any favorite vintages of Songbook?
Oh gosh, the 10 is wonderful. The 11. I'm going to do that.
Gotta love the 13.
12, the 13, the 14,
yeah.
the 15.
All of them. See, that's why you gotta have the vertical, right? You just get the vertical going.
They're, I have a soft spot for the 12 because that was my first vintage here. The 14 is lovely. Don't miss out on the 17. It's a beautiful wine.
I agree. The 17s are across the board. All the 17s you've made. I mean, we're pouring a lot of them. The rock block in the tasting room, and people are just loving that wine right now. So it's been a successful vintage, considering how crazy it was when we were in it. The last question I guess we'll touch on here was, there was a question about any special blend or new wine to mark COVID. I wouldn't say that we have a special wine planned to mark that occasion. I think if you've joined our webinars or a wine club member, you're probably already informed, but we will not have a 2020 vintage due to the fires and the smoke impact that we had in Napa Valley. So because of that, we're getting creative in what we're doing with our 2019s and our incoming 2021s this year. And so there are going to be some really fun things coming your way as a wine club member. One of the funnest things is that I'm actually working on a wine with Chris. And so we'll have more details on that as things evolve. But it's an exciting opportunity for me, and I feel very, very lucky to be able to do that. And we've done one blending session so far, and we're all really, really, really excited to share that with you. So that'll be coming in the near future. But as far as marking the COVID era, I don't know about that. I think next year it'll be our 20th anniversary, and we will probably do something really special because of that. So lots of fun stuff coming your
Forget
guys'
it.
way. Lots of great wines, including, you know, the early, or sorry, the new releases of, you know, the 2018s that are coming out. Poetry, 100-point score, like, you know, congratulations, Chris. That's amazing. That'll be coming in the fall. I mean, all the 18s got great scores, and the 19s, you know, based on how that vintage was, I'm sure it's going to do really well. I should knock on wood for that, but the 19s will be coming out after that, and we're just going to have a really, you know, awesome lineup of wines over the next few years. So no worries there. Now, I believe that was a great session, and Chris, I want to thank you for joining. I want to thank everybody for logging in, and in respect for your time. It is 5 o'clock, so I am gonna sign off at this point and say thank you all. Come visit us when you can, when you feel, you know, safe enough to do so, to travel, and you know, when you can make that work. It's gonna be a great year. It's gonna be a great year, and we've got some great wines. Like I say, we've got some great wines in the tasting room. So come see us. Pick up some of these wines. Give Kristen a call if you need anything. Shoot us an email if you want to, you know, hear any more about the other large formats and other vintages that we have. There's a lot of songbook, a lot of fun goodies that we have hidden away, and we'd love to share them with you. So that pretty much does it for me. Chris, anything else you'd like to say?
No, just you guys at home do all the hard work. Thank you so much for supporting the winery and buying the wines, and it's the best part is sharing the wines with you, and we can't wait to see you here or around the world when we can.
Absolutely. All right, Chris. Well, thanks again for your time. Cheers. And yes, everybody, we do appreciate your support. Thanks again. And we'll see you at the next webinar, probably sometime in April. So we'll see you then. Cheers.
Cheers.